How bumpy is India's road to nuclear submarines? They tried to lease a submarine from Russia in 2004. But before it even arrived, there was a gas leak. After costly repairs, it hit the dock upon return. Then, after more expensive repairs, the high-pressure cylinder exploded. The leased nuclear submarine could only be used as a surface ship. For India, nuclear submarines are a dream just out of reach. It might be hard for most people to imagine just how difficult it is for a country to acquire a nuclear submarine. India spent 50 years trying to explain it to the world. Why owning a nuclear submarine is a luxury out of reach for most countries. During the Indo-Pakistani War of the 1970s, the US aircraft carrier USS Enterprise entered international waters in the Bay of Bengal, trying to pressure India. But when the Soviet Union deployed nuclear-powered submarines from the Pacific Fleet, and they entered the same waters, the US military had no choice but to retreat from the Bay of Bengal. This naval standoff between the US and USSR ended in a complete Soviet victory. India was deeply shocked by the power of the Soviet nuclear submarines. They were stunned. At the time, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi issued a directive. India should have nuclear weapons and nuclear submarines too. And so began India's dream of nuclear submarines. In the 1970s, several Indian companies received orders to start early-stage development of nuclear submarines. When they learned that China already had its own nuclear submarine, India panicked and accelerated its development. But before this, India had no experience in building nuclear submarines. Even its experience with conventional submarines was severely lacking. As a result, India's nuclear submarine program was stagnant. It wasn't until the 1980s that things began to change significantly. For the Soviet Union, the late 1980s were difficult times. They struggled to maintain their massive military force. Gorbachev was pushing for strategic downsizing. As a result, a large number of Soviet weapons were offered for export. But nuclear submarines were clearly not among them. Gorbachev knew that once nuclear weapons started spreading, the whole world would fall into a new arms race. But when India approached Gorbachev, saying they wanted to lease just one nuclear submarine, the situation changed. First, leasing a nuclear submarine meant it still belonged to the USSR in name. The Soviets didn't have to bear the high maintenance costs. Meanwhile, they could earn a large sum of money, a win-win. And technically, no nuclear weapons had been transferred, so the US couldn't object. More importantly, this also helped maintain the Soviet Union's most important strategic ally. Gorbachev immediately agreed to the request. The Soviet Union quickly found a Project 670 nuclear-powered cruise missile submarine, and they leased it to India. India named it INS Arihant. This submarine then became the first nuclear submarine ever operated by the Indian Navy. India also became the sixth country in the world to possess a nuclear submarine. Before that, only the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council had nuclear submarines. India leased the submarine for a total of 3 years. The leasing cost was paid entirely with Indian light industrial goods. At that time, the Baltic states were seeking independence, and the Soviet light industry was in a complete halt. So for both India and the Soviet Union, this arrangement solved pressing needs for both sides. But as the saying goes, man proposes, God disposes. Just as the return date for the submarine arrived, the Soviet Union had already collapsed. However, Russia didn't forget the agreement. They urged India to return the nuclear submarine. Although India was reluctant, they eventually returned it. After actually using a nuclear submarine, India became completely fascinated with the weapon. Since then, they continued negotiations with Russia about leasing nuclear submarines. But to maintain regional balance, Russia refused further agreements. Until in 2008, India once again requested to lease another nuclear submarine from Russia. They hoped to acquire a Project 971 nuclear-powered sub. That year, due to the Russia-Georgia conflict and other issues, Russia was in a tough international situation. In order to break the deadlock, Russia ultimately agreed to lease the submarine to India. The rent started at $1 billion, later rising to $3 billion. But India agreed to the deal without hesitation. News broke that India paid $3 billion for the submarine. Scrolling fragmented news late at night, totally hooked. But worried the screen's brightness hurts your eyes? Why not try Chishui Music's Listen to Douyin mode? International headlines and deep military insights, all curated for you. Watch anytime, anywhere. If you enjoy my analysis, click the bottom left to download Chishui Music now. In the end, India obtained INS Chakra 2, its second nuclear submarine. Even though it was leased, it was still better than having none. While leasing nuclear submarines, India also never gave up on its own independent development. Since launching a formal nuclear submarine program in 1978, India had conducted several nuclear submarine experiments, all ending in failure, until the year 2009.